Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly epic narrative. We're talking about one of the most famous historical accounts of all time, a story of survival, impossible odds, and the literal creation of divine law. It's the story of Prophet Moses. We're going to trace this massive, sweeping journey step by step, looking at not just what happened, but why this story is still basically a foundational blueprint for human society.
So, let's dive right in. Right off the bat, we're faced with this massive question. How exactly does a helpless baby, cast adrift in a river, grow up to take on the most powerful empire of his time and liberate an entire nation? I mean, it sounds like the plot of a summer blockbuster, right? But this is the very real, very high-stakes starting point of our story. Let's see how this all unfolded. Part 1. A River to Royalty. Now, before we even meet Moses, we absolutely have to understand the world he was born into. And honestly, it was a bleak, dire situation. The Israelites were living in Egypt, but they were entirely stripped of their freedom. They were enslaved.
The whole root of this conflict, it was fear. The Pharaoh, the absolute ruler of Egypt, was deeply paranoid about the enslaved Israelites. He was terrified that their population would grow, that they'd rise up, and eventually take over his country. So driven by this intense fear of losing his grip on power, he issues this ruthless, unthinkable edict. He ordered his soldiers to kill all the Israelite baby boys right at birth, no exceptions. It was his way of making sure they could never grow up to fight him. It's a really stark reminder of how absolute power usually relies on absolute terror.
Naturally, this terrifying law triggers a desperate reaction. Moses' mother, completely desperate to save her newborn son, hatches this incredibly daring plan. She places her baby in a basket, sets him adrift on the river Nile, and basically leaves his fate to God's will. And then, miraculously, he's discovered. But not by just anyone. He is found by the Pharaoh's own daughter. She rescues him, brings him right into the very palace that ordered his death, and raises him as her own royal son. Talk about a stunning reversal of fate, right?
Section 2. The Burning Bush. So Moses grows up with all the insane privileges of an Egyptian prince, but his life is about to take a violent, permanent detour.
You see, Moses doesn't stay in that palace bubble forever. One day, he witnesses an Egyptian beating an enslaved Israelite to death. And in a split-second moment that completely changes his trajectory, Moses loses his temper and kills the Egyptian. Well, now he's a wanted man. He literally has no choice but to run for his life. So he leaves Egypt entirely and flees to a land called Midian, leaving his royal status completely in the dust. 40. That is the number of years Moses spends in Midian. Think about that for a second. He goes from being a pampered royal prince to working as a humble shepherd out in the desert. That's 4 long decades of isolation, quiet, and manual labor. The sheer weight of all that time passing really sets the stage for the massive disruption that's about to happen next. So, while he's out there working in the desert as a shepherd, Moses experiences the ultimate call to action. He actually hears the voice of God speaking to him, and it's coming from a bush that's completely on fire but somehow isn't burning up. God gives him what sounds like an impossible task: go back to Egypt and lead his people out of enslavement to the Promised Land. It's a totally daunting mission. I mean, he's stepping back into the very empire that wants him dead. But he's not going alone. His brother Aaron promises to be right there with him.
Part 3. Plagues and the Passover. Armed with this new divine mission, Moses has to head back to Egypt and face off against the most powerful man in the known world.
Moses and Aaron march right up to the Pharaoh and tell him to free the Israelite people. But the Pharaoh, looking down from his throne of absolute authority, flat out refuses. I mean, he's got this massive enslaved workforce that is literally the economic engine of his empire. He is not about to just let them go. And this stubborn refusal, well, it ignites a serious chain reaction of divine anger. 10. That's the sheer scale of the retaliation here. Because of the Pharaoh's absolute refusal, God unleashes 10 distinct, totally devastating plagues on the Egyptians. This wasn't just a quick warning shot. This was a prolonged, systematic dismantling of Egypt's entire society. The devastation just kept escalating time and time again as the Pharaoh stubbornly dug his heels in. And it all culminates in the 10th plague. It's an incredibly terrifying and solemn moment in the story. This final plague was the death of the eldest son in every single family in Egypt. And yes, that included the Pharaoh's own son. To protect themselves from this unimaginable tragedy, the Israelites were given very specific instructions. They had to mark their doorposts with lamb's blood. Let's actually break down what that means, because this establishes a tradition that's still observed today. The term Passover directly originates right here. Because of that lamb's blood marked on the doors, God literally passed over the houses of the Israelites. It kept them completely safe and spared their children, all while the rest of Egypt suffered around them. It was this absolutely devastating 10th plague that finally broke the Pharaoh's iron will and forced him to let the Israelites go.
Section 4. Parting the Red Sea. Now the story is far from over, and the pacing here really kicks into high gear. The Israelites are finally fleeing. They are moving with this frantic, desperate energy to escape generations of enslavement.
But of course, liberation is never that simple. Right after they leave, the Pharaoh changes his mind again. He sends his formidable, highly trained army charging right after them. So the fleeing Israelites suddenly find themselves in a literal dead end. They've got this massive, angry Egyptian army bearing down on them from behind, and the deep, impassable waters of the Red Sea completely blocking them in the front. They are totally trapped, nowhere to go.
But then, God intervenes once more with this incredible dynamic sequence of events. First, God tells Moses to lift up his rod. Second, as he does it, the waters of the Red Sea physically part, just splitting right open to make a dry path straight through the middle of the sea. And third, once the Israelites are safely walking onto the other shore, Moses raises his rod again, and the waters violently crash back down, completely swallowing the pursuing Egyptian army. Watching all this from the safety of the far shore, Moses witnesses the ultimate resolution. The waters have completely swallowed the Pharaoh's army. God saved the Israelites at the absolute last second, and the direct threat of the Egyptian empire is finally, literally washed away behind them.
Section 5. Wilderness to Mount Sinai. Now the tone completely shifts from a fast-paced escape to one of really gritty endurance. I mean, the Israelites are finally free, which is amazing, but they're facing a harsh new reality. They have absolutely nowhere to live. They're just wandering this brutal desert, searching for a promised land called Canaan.
This journey was unbelievably long, and pretty soon, the reality of survival just hits them hard. They were exhausted, they were starving, and entirely out of water. But that divine provision, it kept showing up. When they were starving, Moses promised God would provide. And incredibly, they'd wake up to find the ground covered in this white food that tasted like honey, which we know as manna. And when their water totally dried up, God told Moses to just strike a rock with his rod, and fresh water literally poured out of it. The environment was absolutely brutal, but their survival was guaranteed.
Finally, after 3 agonizing months of trekking through the wilderness, they reach a massive milestone. They arrive at the foot of Mount Sinai. And this is where the story builds to its epic climax. God actually calls Moses to meet him at the very top of the mountain. And Moses has to make this crazy, daunting climb right in the middle of a violent, crashing thunderstorm.
And there, right at the top of that mountain, we get the real culmination of this entire journey. God gives Moses 10 critically important laws, the 10 Commandments. This is a monumental shift for them. Think about it. After being enslaved for generations, the Israelites didn't just need physical freedom. They needed a framework. They needed to know how to actually live as a free, organized society. So Moses comes back down with these laws, moving his people from a state of pure, desperate survival into a nation governed by a moral code. Which brings us to a final, profound question to close out our explainer today. These 10 Commandments were originally designed to tell a newly liberated ancient people how to live together. But how might these foundational rules, handed down in a thunderstorm thousands of years ago, still influence the laws, the morals, and the societies we live in today? It is a fascinating connection to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.